You wake up tomorrow with a sore throat, maybe a fever. Your head feels like someone filled it with wet sand and your body has decided, completely without your permission, to stop cooperating. So you do what any reasonable modern human does. You take some medicine, drink something warm, complain about it to at least 3 people who didn't ask, and spend the rest of the day horizontal, watching something you've already seen 4 times. Simple, manageable, annoying, but survivable. Now imagine doing all of that minus the medicine, minus the doctor, minus the hospital 2 miles away with trained professionals and machines that cost more than a house, minus the understanding that tiny invisible organisms called bacteria even exist. You're sick, you feel awful, and you have absolutely no idea why. That was the reality for most of human history. And here's the question nobody really stops to ask. What did they actually do about it? Because they did something. They always did something. Humans are not the kind of creature that sits quietly and accepts suffering without at least attempting to fight back. Even 50,000 years ago, even before writing, before cities, before anyone had a word for medicine, our ancestors were already trying. And what they came up with is equal parts fascinating, terrifying, and honestly more sophisticated than most of us would expect. Let's go back. Way back before antibiotics, before germ theory, before anyone understood what a virus even was. The first thing ancient humans did when someone got sick was look for a reason. Not a biological reason, a spiritual one. Because in a world where the invisible was unexplainable, illness made the most sense as punishment, as a message, as something done to you, not something happening inside you. In ancient Mesopotamia, one of the earliest civilizations we have records for, sickness was believed to be caused by demons, literal supernatural entities that entered the body and caused chaos from the inside. The treatment wasn't medicine, it was ritual. Priests who were also healers would perform elaborate ceremonies, chanting specific incantations, burning offerings, and attempting to drive the demon out through spiritual force. They had entire written catalogs of demons, each one responsible for a different illness. Headache demon, fever demon, stomach demon. It sounds almost funny until you realize these people were genuinely trying their absolute best with the information they had. But here's the thing that's easy to miss. Alongside the rituals, they were also using plants. Because somewhere between the prayers and the incantations, ancient healers noticed something. Certain plants made people feel better. Certain roots reduced fever. Certain leaves, when chewed, dulled pain. This wasn't mystical. This was observation. Thousands of years of watching, experimenting, failing, and occasionally succeeding. And the results were surprisingly effective. Willow bark, used in ancient Egypt and by multiple cultures across the ancient world, contains salicin, the same compound that modern science eventually synthesized into aspirin. Ancient Egyptians weren't just guessing. They had entire medical papyri, written documents cataloging treatments, remedies, and surgical procedures with a level of detail that genuinely shocked modern historians when they were first translated. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BC, contains over 700 remedies, 700, covering everything from infections to digestive issues to mental illness. They didn't have our vocabulary for it, but they were doing medicine. And then there's ancient Greece, where something shifted, where a man named Hippocrates looked at illness and said, for the first time in recorded history, maybe this isn't demons. Maybe this is the body. Maybe sickness has a physical cause that we can observe, study, and treat logically. He was wrong about a lot of the specifics. His theory of 4 humors, the idea that illness came from imbalances of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, would dominate medicine for over 1,000 years and cause enormous amounts of harm. But the direction he pointed was correct, away from the supernatural, toward the observable. Meanwhile, in ancient China, an entire parallel system was developing, one built around the concept of qi, the life force flowing through the body, and the idea that illness meant that flow had been disrupted. Acupuncture, herbal remedies, dietary changes, practices that looked completely different from anything happening in Egypt or Greece but were driven by the same core human impulse. Understand the body, fix what's broken, keep people alive. And keep people alive they did. Not always, not reliably, not with anything close to modern success rates. Ancient people died from infections we cure in 3 days. They died from fevers we break in an afternoon. They died from things we've almost entirely forgotten are dangerous. But they also survived things that should have killed them. And sometimes, when we look closely at what they were using, we understand why. Because nature, it turns out, is full of medicine. Humans didn't invent healing. We discovered it, slowly, painfully, through generations of trial and error, and watching what worked and passing that knowledge forward in stories and rituals and written records and whispered instructions between healers who understood that what they carried mattered. Here's what gets me about all of this. The next time you swallow a painkiller without thinking about it, or walk into a clinic and describe your symptoms to someone trained to recognize them, or take for granted that your fever will break and you will be fine, remember that someone, thousands of years ago, was also sick, also scared, also determined to survive, and they were doing the absolute best they could with sharp rocks, bitter roots, a fire, and an unshakable human refusal to give up. We didn't start figuring out medicine recently. We never stopped trying to figure it out. And somehow, against genuinely impossible odds, it worked.